to be a good journalist, you really just have to be a well-rounded person and, just go about your day wondering things, and reaching out and being willing to tackle things that are unknown to you. So a lot of it is really just stemming from a place of curiosity. I'm director of nonfiction media for a small studio that my friends created after they graduated. And that documentary came to me from a quick Google search, just based on some interests of mine, and maybe looking at things that are common headlines. Like this upcoming documentary is on Asian Americans in the 19th century, and trying to find a perspective on it that hasn't been seen before. This documentary is about Chinese American cowboys, which is not something you would typically think of when you think of Chinese Americans in the 19th century. But I think it is a really fascinating part of journalism, taking something that is very commonly talked about and finding a new angle, and just diving into the nuance as opposed to being intimidated by it. The other thing I wanted to touch on too is that I have a background in history studies as well, and that's really been the main thing that got me into documentary production. It's also been one of the biggest aids to me in research and writing. There's been a lot of valuable databases that are free to the public, that have either been used to stem questions that I've then built off of, or to supplement work that I'm already trying to study, whether that's things like Chronicling America, which is this like 200-year-old database of newspapers all throughout the United States, or things like JSTOR, where you really just type in a topic and learn all these particular, very nuanced studies of things that you may have a very broad perspective of. I have to remind myself sometimes that you can't go in with a predetermined story, or a conclusion or a purpose. It's more so a particular angle, a particular side of something that you're trying to reveal, as opposed to direct people towards, if that makes sense. And so that's something that, as a filmmaker, might be disappointing, because obviously the narrative isn't as compelling, but that's not what matters in this situation. And you just want to get to the truth. So that's been something that, for documentaries, that I've always had to whittle away on. Is in this new documentary I'm working on, it's the story of, again, this Chinese American cowboy. The thing for me that's been gut wrenching as a filmmaker is trying to take away the tall tales that make him so mythical. There's all these stories of him, getting into gunfights and earning the name Shoot 'em Down Sam, and all this crazy stuff about that. You have to verify, if you want to make a documentary. The intrigue really has to come from the topic itself, and not a particular storyline that you see coming from the topic. There's a lot of times where I do have to sit and introspect about just like, what am I emotionally attached to as a storyteller, and what is the truth, and how can I make sure that the truth comes out in a way that grabs people's attention, but without compromising its integrity. For me, the process with documentaries has been that you go out with questions and you come back with footage, and then from the footage you edit a story. You carve a story in the edit. You're essentially doing what you would in the realm of writing anyway, but instead of cutting out words and rearranging columns, what you're doing is cutting out footage and rearranging sound bites and things like that, to the point where you do have a coherent story. For me, it's casting a wide net and just asking as many questions as you can about things, slowly bringing it in, getting all the footage compiled, and then finding a story in it. I know a lot of people get their start doing documentaries on restaurants, and finding just something small like that has a lot of interest to you, and going into the story of it, going into the history of, I'll just take this restaurant as an example. Like, how did the restaurant come to be? How did it get its name? What does the community think of it? Where do people, all the questions that you would typically ask when writing an article. Anyhow, take those skills that you already have and deep diving into things. I mean, a lot of it really does come down to just building rapport, especially when you're so focused on that one question, that key question that you want to ask, you don't want to exhibit bias in any way, but what you could do is ask very simple questions, things that aren't necessarily related, everyday things, very small things. I think that piles up after a while. And really, it is a conversation when you are doing that interview. And the more that it feels like one, and the more that it feels like there is an attentive ear, a human ear that's listening to you and not just a mic, I think that makes the biggest difference. Yearning to investigate things stuck with me. And I think that what was really appealing to me about history is the fact that you are investigating, but uh, in a realm that will not react to you in real time. When you are investigating history, there is no more evidence to gather than what's already there. And I think that's really helped me go into documentaries and hopefully prepare me for this writing role that I'm going to have in the fall, because it's provided an environment where there are resources available, but you still have to dig. But there isn't there's no change to it. It is what it is, and it's just up to you to uncover that in its entirety. The way I used to hate history in high school because it was presented as so sterile, and something that's very static. I used to think it was a lot of dates and events and trivia because that's how it's presented. I feel like there are a lot of textbooks where what you learn is this happened, then that happened, then that happened. I think that first documentary I made about the history of this cemetery really opened up just how many perspectives there are on, if there are 16 different perspectives on this one unmarked cemetery, then we can imagine what, the plethora of perspectives that there are on other topics. A lot of my recent work, again, like this new documentary I'm doing, is focused on Asian American history. And I think a lot of that has to do with just what we're seeing nowadays, the big hike in anti-Asian, hate crimes and things like that. The reasoning that you see people cite when trying to justify those actions, a lot of it is rooted in a very poor perception of history. The approach to it has changed so much. You don't want to commodify anyone that you're photographing, but you also want to get the full grasp of the event that is taking place, because obviously, whatever the protest is, a protest is a momentous event. I try and absorb the totality of it. I at least tend to veer away from looking at individuals because, obviously that's different when it comes to interviews and things like that. But I think when it comes to trying to make sure that you're not commodifying a particular or making light of a particular tragedy or an encounter or things like that, I think the best way to do that and still capture the idea of the event is to aim for the wider angle, I guess is what I'm saying. There is a huge appeal to that. I mean, it is, if screenwriters mainly write from personal experience, whether they realize it or not, then you can lean into that even more so when obviously doing a documentary on your actual experiences, and in a way that is more appealing to me, because it almost feels more like a conversation with someone who is real and exists in the real world and is just telling you a story. So that's certainly something that I've been interested in. I haven't produced anything yet, but I was just thinking about, when it comes to history documentaries and things like that, I think I could find a way to kind of intertwine them, because there is always a place to start because you come from somewhere. A lot of my work has been interviews, and so a lot of that has been really taking the time to see what someone has said, online about a particular topic, if that's what you're interviewing them on. You really just want a full picture of who this person is before you go into an interview. Both for the sake of actually writing and producing a journalistic video or column, and also to guide some of the questions that you have on this person, and make sure that you're not just retreading the same ground. Because again, the intrigue of journalism and documentaries, at least for me, comes from that idea of providing a new angle on something that may already be in the public eye.